Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are doing a very special Albums I Missed video, talking about a slew of albums that unfortunately I did not have the chance to talk about previously here on the Metal Meltdown in a full-blown album review that came out in the month of September 2023. And as it turns out, not only were there a bunch of albums released within the past few weeks, but a lot of them were really big and really interesting. But guess what? I'm not as chronically online as you think I am. I actually have a job and a life outside of these walls, outside of this screen. And therefore, talking about all of these albums in album reviews, it's just not possible. It's just not possible. Where's this album? Where's this album? How come you talked about this album instead of this album? Because that's... Shut the fuck up. Shut your mouth. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. I know you mean well. I know it. And I'm not mad at you. But shut the fuck up for just one minute. 1 minute. Please and thank you. First up, The Sinner Rides Again from KK's Priest. It's basically another version of Judas Priest featuring several former members of Judas Priest, including Tim Owens, who briefly filled in for Rob Halford in the 90s, and also KK Downing, who retired, and then I guess he didn't, and now he's insisting the band forced him to retire. I don't fully understand this drama. Here's what I do know. This album, kind of boring. Didn't really do much for me. It didn't even really pack a lot of that classic Judas Priest energy like the previous KK's Priest album did. It feels more in the vein of like some power metal kind of stuff. Like it feels very fantastical and over the top. For the record, it's not bad. Like it's well made and well performed. I'm just really not interested in this at all. Like, there's nothing here that I haven't seen other heavy metal and power metal bands do already, and for that matter, do with more energy and creativity. So, yeah. I don't know, I just don't care. I just don't care. If you do, good for you. I just don't, though. Every time I think of this band, it's just like, hey, Mom, can we have Judas Priest? We have Judas Priest at home, and this is Judas Priest at home. Next up, we have a surprise EP from Blood Incantation entitled Luminescent Bridge. And not only was this thing truly a surprise, but it came out on the same day that Tomb Mold dropped their surprise album, The Enduring Spirit. And that sucked because I was kind of forced to choose, because I just didn't have time to talk about both. I wanted to, but I just didn't have the time. So I chose the Tomb Mold album because at least it was a full-blown album and there was a little bit more to dissect and analyze and dive into, whereas this is just 2 songs. Sorry, Blood Incantation, I still love you. And to be fair, these 2 songs are action-packed with cosmic death metal of epic proportions. Pummeling riffs, glistening synthesizers, incredible, churning, brutal progressions, and also these wide, vast, spacious, psychedelic sections. Like, this EP feels like a culmination of everything Blood Incantation have been doing up to this point. The most progressive and psychedelic and far-out aspects, and the most brutal aspects of hidden history of the human race, as well as the full-on, like, prog and psychedelic ambience of last year's Time Wave Zero EP. It's so hypnotic and transcendent and immersive. I mean, I'm kind of in awe of this thing. A part of me thinks that maybe Blood Incantation is just going to stick with EPs for a while. I mean, it's been years since they dropped an album at this point, and we've gotten 2 EPs now, so that just kind of feels like the path we're on. Which sucks, because I would love a full-blown album, but if that is indeed the path we're on, fuck it. I'm going to follow them, because, I mean, they never miss. It's consistently so fucking great. Yeah, I love it. One of the best metal EPs of the year. And I say that knowing damn well that I just said that about Wolves in the Throne Room. We might be doing a top 10 best EPs of the year video. We might finally do that this year, because Jesus Christ, there have been so many good EPs this year. Next up, we have Void from Kenmode, and of all the albums we're talking about today, this is one of the ones I most wanted to do a video for. There's one other that I really wanted to do a video for, but it just didn't happen, unfortunately. Been a fan of Kenmode for a long time, and this album is doing nothing to change my mind on that. More chaotic, dark, perverse, like noise rock and sludge metal and post metal. It's so twisted, it's so bleak. I love the punishing vibe and atmosphere of this thing. I love some of the weirder, jazzier kind of touches and flourishes across the album. I love all of its demented rhythmic patterns and outbursts. I love the horrific wailing saxophones of I Cannot. I love that kind of like 90s shoegaze meets post-punk vibe of We're Small Enough. Love the opening number, The Shrike, as well, which just completely fucking bulldozes you with, like, this really metallic kind of, like, grisly post-hardcore. It's weird, it's dark, it's fucked up. I don't even really know what else I can say. It's Kenmode doing what they do best, baby. Another fantastic album from Kenmode. Only a year after another previously fantastic album from Kenmode. These guys never fucking miss. Next up, we have The Godslayer from Otep. Guess what? It's fucking terrible. I've never really liked Otep. I would describe her music as like cringy music, but for like white Twitter neoliberals. Like it's just so pretentious and so cringy, and it just screams like, look at me, mom, kind of energy. Like, I just, So this album was destined to fail already. The fact that it was also a cover album and turns a slew of well-known songs from a slew of well-known artists into, like, the most obnoxious fucking piles of alt-metal crap ever just completely seals the fucking deal. And credit to Otep, she does not limit herself to the rock and metal and alternative music realms. No one is safe from her wrath on this thing. I mean, everything from Nirvana to Slipknot to Eminem to Billie Eilish to Lil Peep and Olivia Rodrigo. I mean, it's just, and it's all so bad. The cover of California Girls, originally from Katy Perry especially. Jesus fucking Christ. Like, why on earth would you turn this, like, super bubbly, girly pop song into, like, this slow, quiet, industrial, like, burner with all these gurgling sounds and all these anguished vocals? Like, why would you do that? That's objectively a horrible idea. And it's performed so badly and so pretentiously, and it's produced somehow even worse. I mean, Otep isn't like a massive name within the rock and metal worlds. I mean, we're not talking about like an Ozzy or a Metallica or a Slipknot level artist here in terms of like popularity and commercial success. But surely she's been around long enough that she can like put a little more money into mixing and mastering. So what the fuck? Either that or the people she's hired to mix and master this thing are just completely incompetent, because this thing just sounds like a bunch of noise and static and gristle. Yeah, unsurprisingly, an Otep cover album is every bit as fucking terrible as you think it sounds. It's fucking awful. Next up, we have Memorial, brand new studio album from Swedish progressive metal crew Soen, featuring Martin Lopez of Opeth and Monomorph fame. And it's kind of dull. It's kind of bland, which I was shocked by. I've usually liked a lot of Soen's stuff, but this just doesn't do it for me at all. They've really simplified the songwriting here. They've really toned down on the most provocative and progressive elements of their sound. And what we're left with is something that's just not very engaging, not very smart, not very challenging, and not very memorable. It's like a very basic, moody rock album with like an alternative, progressive coat of paint, and one that's not even very well applied, might I add. It's so fucking dull and so fucking bland that honestly, I totally forgot about this album completely. I listened to it the weekend it came out, kind of excited for it, because again, I've liked a lot of previous stuff from Soen, but like, it just had no fucking impact on me. So yeah, probably their worst album. I would say. Go back and listen to Terulian and Lycaea instead. Don't bother. In my opinion, don't bother. It ain't worth it. Next up, we have Newman from Alkaloid, and this is another album that kind of came up out of nowhere for me. I don't even remember hearing about an Alkaloid album. I haven't heard about this band in like 5-6 years now, I think. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute. For those of you unfamiliar with this band, it's basically Obscura 2.0. It is a project formed by Hans Grossman after being fired from Obscura or choosing to leave. I don't know. Obscura has a weird, complicated history with a literal revolving door lineup, but whatever. This is basically Obscura 2.0. Progressive and technical death metal with a lot of like wild flourishes and incredible musicianship and very clean production. I will say I do think the production is a little bit too clean at times. There are some parts where I feel like a little bit more muscle and grit would have really benefited the album. I also feel like this album is too long. It does not need to be 70 minutes. Period. But that aside, I mean, it's chock full of like progressive tech death metal goodness. So if you're looking for an alternative to Obscura or some more spacey sci-fi progressive metal, you know, this will do the trick quite nicely. Next up, we have Esto e Brujeria from Brujeria, another band I haven't heard from in quite some time. I think it's been like 7 years since these guys dropped an album. This is a semi-anonymous collective of like Latin American, Mexican American metal musicians, also somehow featuring Shane Embury from Napalm Death, who very, very poorly disguised consistently in Brujeria. Playing, well, Mexican and Mexican-American grindcore and death metal. It's definitely a little weird. They all use pseudonyms and they kind of portray themselves as like Mexican drug lords. And of course, with all their lyrics being in Spanish, I can't really tell you exactly what a lot of the music is talking about. But I can tell you it deals a lot with Satanism and witchcraft and like Mexican politics and American politics. It might sound a little silly from the outside looking in. I can picture more American conservatives looking at this as being dangerous as well. I can also picture more annoying, like, liberal Americans being like, this seems problematic. But, like, I don't know, I think it's pretty fun. Like, I've thoroughly enjoyed a lot of what Brujeria has done. This is them, I think, at their heaviest and their most urgent in a while. I also feel like this is them at their wackiest, in a way. I mean, for God's sakes, the album opens with what almost sounds like something from like a Mexican news program, and like there's all these like slower kind of like trumpet sections and horn sections contrasted with like blast beats and like this very aggressive riffing. There's also these almost like spoken word kind of like chanted vocals across the album. It kind of sounds like people like yelling or reciting something. You have songs called Lord Nazi Russo and COVID 666. The album even closes with a heavily exaggerated cover of Cocaine, originally from Eric Clapton. In these moments, it almost kind of feels like the Latin Mexican-American equivalent to something like Stormtroopers of Death, SOD, from back in the day. But also, much like something from SOD, all along the way, it's still kicking pretty legitimate and thorough amounts of ass. I thought about reviewing this album, and had I done so, it would have gotten a solid 4 out of 5. I think this is a great record. Next up, we have Crepuscule Natura from Uada. Earlier in September, I asked you, what would you rather talk about? What would you rather see me review on the Metal Meltdown? Would you rather see a Sylosis album review for a sign of things to come? Or would you rather talk about this Uada album? And you guys pretty much overwhelmingly chose Sylosis. Like, it wasn't close. And I'm kind of happy you did, because I just had more to say about that album. This, by comparison, I would say I prefer this overall, but there just isn't really as much to talk about. Like, it's pretty straightforward, like, melodic black metal with some atmospheric flavors and textures. It's very much in line with what Uada have done before, just, like, slightly more refined. I like the more clean, cosmic, otherworldly production and vibe here. I think a lot of the hooks and arrangements are well put together. I like that there's more elaborate guitar work. I also like that there are some slower, moodier, more ritualistic sections here and there. There's a good amount of contrast. It's well written, well put together. Probably Uada's most interesting album to date, I would say. Just a really well-made and occasionally surprisingly very versatile little package. Next up, we have Coronet Jupiter from Gridlink, and if Brujeria gets the silver medal in grindcore, this probably gets the gold, because holy shit, this thing fucks. This thing is tight. This thing hits. I'm not really too familiar with a lot of Gridlink stuff, to be honest. In my defense, they've never really been active in the Metalverse in the time that I have been on YouTube and doing the Metal Meltdown, so I've not really had much a reason to take notice of them. So, yeah. I am, however, familiar with Discordance Axis, and I bring this up because I feel like Discordance Axis is kind of like a precursor to a lot of what Gridlink is doing, at least based on what I'm seeing so far. Not just on this album, but on other Gridlink albums I have since explored. And I'm really happy with that because I love Discordance Axis. They have a really unique take on grindcore. And that transitions to Gridlink. Like, it's so tight, it's so technical, it's so wild and erratic and unhinged. There are these really cool melodic flourishes, some great crescending guitar. There's some really cool melodic flourishes too, some great crescending guitars. I love the vocal work here, like, holy shit. John Chang, formerly of Discordance Axis as well, might I add, just absolutely wailing and screaming his fucking guts out. Rent was fucking due the day he recorded this thing. Holy shit. Just like any great grindcore album should do, it just completely annihilates and bashes away for like 18 minutes or so, and then it fucks off and goes home. Like, I love that. That's awesome. This thing's fucking great. This thing almost got a review, and I really wanted to review it. Had I done so, this would have also been a 4 to 5, but we'd be leaning close to a 4.5 to 5. I mean, this thing's fucking fantastic. Next up, we have Almost Human, the third full-length studio album from this international, technical, brutal death metal band. And I dig it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff, but I like the cosmic textures, and I like the disorienting, like, progressions and chords. I like how brutal it is. I like those gurgling vocals. The whole thing kind of feels like a more simplified take on, like, Artificial Brain and what they've been doing over the past few years. It's tight, it's gnarly, it's wild, it's in your face, and it doesn't waste any fucking time. Like, this thing actually wraps up arguably before it should, like, to the point where it's almost anticlimactic. Like, this thing is like 26 minutes long. I'm not complaining or nothing, don't get me wrong, sometimes the shorter the better. That's definitely the case with, like, grindcore, as we discussed with Gridlink. That's sometimes the case with a lot of, like, hardcore and thrash metal as well. Technical, brutal death metal, you know what? Sometimes it can get tiring, sometimes it can get exhausting, sometimes bands can repeat themselves quite a bit, so fuck it. I'm actually fine with a shorter runtime here, with a significantly shorter runtime here. Yeah, I dig it. Another band I hadn't really paid much attention to beforehand. That might change going forward. I like what I'm hearing here. Next up, we have Impara, the debut album from As in Hell, the Swedish European death metal worship outfit from Michael Poulsen of Volbeat fame. Yeah, no joke, guys. Michael Poulsen from Volbeat, the fucking Danish rockabilly country metal hard rock band, has decided to go full-blown Swedish and Scandinavian death metal with As in Hell, paying homage to Entombed and Grave and, like, Early at the Gates and, you know, a little bit of Bolt Thrower as well kind of thrown in the mix, a little bit of Benediction thrown into the mix. And it's honestly kind of great. I mean, it won't blow your mind or change your life if you're familiar with any of these bands and any of their most iconic works. But, like, it's solid, it's fun, it gets the job done. It's very aggressive and crusty, and it has a lot of energy and a lot of, like, rolling, pummeling riffs and beats. It has a nice live, organic kind of feel. Like, it almost sounds like a really good, like, live album at times with how, like, punchy and like, crisp it is. Some songs definitely go a little harder than others, and by design it is a little derivative and one-dimensional, but all things considered, not bad. Props to Michael from Volbeat for branching out, doing something a little different. I mean, I know he used to be in a death metal band, like, way back in the day, but, like, that was a long time ago. That was way back in the day. This is now, and the Michael Poulsen of now doesn't make stuff like this, so, good for him, man. This was cool. Next up, we have The Crisis as Condition, the sophomore studio album from Terminalist. Gnarly, in-your-face, technical, progressive, sci-fi, thrash metal, vector vibes galore here. I'm digging it, though. I'm not complaining. It's nice to have an alternative to Vector that doesn't have the reek of David DeSanto. I love how it throws out like these super fast technical riffs at you. I love how it throws out like these cosmic ambient moments and contrast that with some full-on like extreme metal. Love those rabid, venomous vocals. I love all the wild, frantic guitar pyrotechnics. Yeah, I'm loving this, man. Just fucking great record. I kind of want to pick this up on vinyl. It's great to see, too, that there are bands actually trying to fill the gap left by Vector. Like, that's awesome to fucking see. Like, between this and that Cryptosis record from a couple years back, like, I feel like we're on the verge of, like, some really cool, like, sci-fi, technical, progressive thrash mania. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing what these bands produce. Next up, we have Leprous Daylight from Fossilization, brand new album from this underground Death Doom duo from Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is a great album. I like how dark and demented and grisly it is. I like that it has these like lumbering sections with these disorienting and like dissonant guitar textures and patterns and these very anguished vocals. And I also love how it has these like really crusty, cavernous explosions of like modern death metal brutality. It kind of feels like a combination of the best and the gnarliest elements of like Montefiore and Tomb Mold. Love how this thing will bring in like other elements from extreme metal to provide some contrast and extra spice and flavor. Like on the track, The Night Spoke the Tongue of Flames, you'll have these like almost blackened death metal-esque outbursts, and occasionally throughout the album you'll also have these more droning sections that feel akin to something I might hear from Primitive Man. It's subtle, but it is effective, especially when the bulk of what you're hearing here is really agonizing, like tormenting noise. Definitely not for the faint of heart. It's definitely pretty bleak. It's definitely one of the darkest and most brutal albums we're talking about today. But I do still recommend it if you were just looking for some really fucked up, like, cavernous death doom. And finally, let's talk about Horned Lord of the Thorned Castle, which I didn't really intend on talking about because I didn't even know that it fucking existed until, like, yesterday. But I just got, like, weirdly a lot of comments from people who wanted to talk about this album, and they were so enthusiastic, and so, like, Robert, you gotta take a look at this. This is one of the best black metal records of the year. Like, it's so wild. It's so cool. It's so epic. So I said, fuck it. Curiosity got the better of me, and, we're gonna disagree slightly, but I can totally understand where your enthusiasm is coming from, because this thing is pretty cray-cray at times. Like Children of Bodom, but also like a little bit of Winter Sun and a little bit of Crimson Shadows and like Aether Realm before the Redneck Vikings from Hell album. Yeah, it's kind of like a mix of like power metal, black metal, all kinds of stuff there. As such, definitely not the kind of thing I would normally listen to. It's pretty over the top and cheesy at times, but I can't deny there's a lot of great guitar wizardry here. It is very well constructed. The story, I think, is very well told and executed. And for a debut album, there's a lot of, like, I'm impressed. I might have to pay more attention to Moonlight Sorcery in the future, because I feel like with a good budget and with more time put into refining the song craft, like they could be on the verge of like a black metal, power metal fusion classic. Like, let them cook. Give them some time. Give them some better ingredients and, you know, some better equipment, but let them cook irregardless. They could be onto something. All right, and that's it for me. I'm well aware there are probably like 100 other albums that came out in September that we could talk about, but like, Jesus Christ, I've been sitting here for a while. I want to go outside. The weather, it's surprisingly quite nice outside in Toronto today. I'd like to go for a walk. I'd like to go get a bite to eat. Perhaps something or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things to drink. I don't know. Depends on how friendly the bartender is. So why don't you take over? Why don't you tell me what other albums came out in September that I did not talk about, that we should talk about, or that maybe we should just listen to? We don't have to make a big deal out of every album. We can just listen to it and have fun and then talk about it later on in the comments section, perhaps, or on Discord, or you can just reach out. You know, it's all good and cool. Press this button to subscribe. Look, there's even more videos here. Check us out on social media. Pick up some merch on the Redbubbles. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.